VHF Contesting, and I'm relatively new to it. As things go in ham radio, typically measured in decades rather than years or months. But I think I started back. Well, I'll get into that in the next slide. But there's a phrase here, and it was used in the preview for this presentation, something that I picked up from Joel Harrison. Joel, W5ZN, was the president of the ARRL at one time. He holds the Fred Fish Memorial Award. So he knows a little bit about VHF and 6 meters, but he calls it magic bands with super results from average stations. And that has a certain appeal to it to me, as I have a goal of keeping things simple. I don't often follow that goal, but it is an objective of mine. But as Paul gave you a little overview of my background, began working at Heathkit in 1977, left them in 1989. The education business, which I was a part of, continued, I believe, well into the 90s. But the kit business, of course, it didn't make economic sense with next to no labor in the kits. And I can tell you and discuss that for ages. Actually started writing for 73 magazine and Wayne Green, which led to writing at Heathkit. But I blog on K5ND.radio. ICOM America has me write some blogs, also for FB News, which is a Japanese outlet. I'd write on career topics for LinkedIn. And then in scouting, the K2BSA past president, the current trustee of their license, and I've led the national and the world Jamboree amateur radio efforts, and was a member of the World Jamboree on the Air team for 5 years, which was an extraordinary opportunity. But this topic, it's about the joys of contesting. I love the term radio sport. I think that contesting sometimes has a negative rap by some in amateur radio. I think radio sport says it maybe just a little bit better. But what I like about it is there are high levels of activity. We can sit here in North Texas and not have any activity for a full week, unless it's somebody that seems to have pushed the CQ button on FT8 and leave it running for hours at a time. But contesting brings everybody out. HF contests, you can work DXCC in a weekend. For that matter, I think you could work VUCC in a weekend, provided 6 meters is open. But there's more stations, there's more activity, there is competition, and you can measure that improvement over time because you've got a score. Another thing for somebody like me who likes to collect paper, who has somewhat of an achievement focus, but my own contesting journey, I'm sure you guys have experienced something similar. I got back into the hobby. I originally licensed in '73, spent some time with a family and career, and then came back in 2006. And I was committed. Simple station, CW, make some fun QSOs. And then one Friday night, I was on 40 meters, and all heck broke loose with all these stations firing up for a CW contest. And as soon as I decoded some of the 30 or 40 word per minute CW, I realized there was a lot of DX happening during the contest. Holy cow, doesn't happen any other time. Let me work some of these stations. So that was the attraction, not to get a score or anything, just to work some of these stations. Well, then I started seeing my score. Then I going, gosh, maybe I could do better. And then you start looking at categories. Where could I optimize my category? My favorite 15 meters single band QRP. Favorite category, I could put up a wire moccasin that I made with fishing poles and really do fun things with that. And then I started looking at VHF, and by and large, I think the attractions came from starting to experiment a little bit with 6 meters, then going to Contest University and sitting in on Joel's presentation and going, man, there is something here, and there's some cool categories that fit and that work. And you can see here the photographs from my station from CW to doing a lot of RIDI, SO2V RIDI, and then doing the VHF contest by adding an IC 910 initially. And then finally realizing that there are about 12 stations in North Texas. Once you've worked them, you're done. But if you're a rover, every time you go to a new grid, you get to work them all over again. So that's what I did. So that was my contesting journey. But the big things for VHF contesting, they're small antennas. A lot of options with the antennas, and I'll show some photos later, but the power levels aren't all that critical either. This is for contesting. Now, if you're doing moon bounce, that's maybe a little different matter, but what Joel describes in his presentations, the power is put you in a different category, low or high power, and there's some QRP categories as well. But it's a small group of competitors, and this is a pretty staggering number here. The CQ Worldwide Single Sideband Contest, 38,000 entries. The VHF contest, 750. Okay, and then you get down into your particular category, and so you have a much smaller level of competitors there. The other thing that I learned early on in VHF contesting, modes don't matter. If you've done some HF contesting, you can enter CW only, you can enter single sideband, you can enter both. Good one for that is the IARU contest. Well, in VHF, it doesn't matter what mode you're in, it's a QSO. They really don't care. So another thing I like about VHF contesting, there really isn't all that many, and so I can gear up for a big rover operation essentially 4 times a year. The ARRL contests are in January, June, and September. The big one is in June. That's when the 6-meter openings usually happen, although what I'm finding with FT8 and before that JT65, January and September have some openings on 6 as well that really I don't think we actually saw before. The worldwide contest, the VHF in July, that's a good one as well for 6 meters. And a difference with that is there's only 2 bands in that contest. The ARRL contest, it's from 6 meters to microwaves. It's also a smaller number of hours you're committing, Saturday afternoon to Sunday evening. So a little bit better. And actually, I'll mention that's one of the reasons I like 15 meters single band because I could sleep at night because 15 meters is shut down at night. But there's a Central States VHF sprints as well in the spring and the fall. The entry categories, you can do a little more study on these. This is a maxed out text slide, but they're single operator, low power, high power. The 200, 150 watts, those are 200 for 6 and 2 meters, 100 watts for 220 and 432, and 50 watts for 432. I'd have that. I've forgotten exactly how that works, but high power is anything above low power. The portable operation is kind of is interesting to me. I'd love to go to one excellent position and camp out there, but 10 watts doesn't quite float my boat. And Rover, I can do it from a lot of those places. But single operator 3-band is one that I like because it fits the rigs that a lot of us have. 9100 or Kenwood 2000. It's 6 meters, 2 meters, and 432. It's 100 watts on the first 2 bands and 50 watts on 432. So it fits with the equipment you probably have in your shack already. And there's an FM only category as well. The Rover operations, classic Rover, which is 2 ops, limited Rover, which is one that I like, the low 4 bands. It makes it a little simpler. with just 4 bands, 4 antennas, and all the equipment to go with 4 bands. Limits the competition a little bit as well. And then there's unlimited Rover, which is that green truck that you probably saw with all the bands on it. And then of course there's some multi-operator ones. Exchange 4-digit grids, multipliers are the grids. And you can see the point structure there for the different bands. The higher up you go, more points you're going to add to your score. And then Rovers get a multiplier for each grid that they activate. The other difference, HF to VHF contesting, at least in the ARRL contest, is that the assistance for VHF contests is really, really open. You can use DX maps, you can use the chat rooms, the social media, texting, phone calls, APRS for rovers to track their progress. You can self-spot. Hey, I'm on 2 meters in Echo Mike 03 pointing south, work me. But the only thing you can't do is say, I've copied your RRR, I'm still waiting for your 73. You can't say stuff like that during the QSO. But there's other outlets, Ping Jockey, VHF Chat, Slack, ON4KST has a chat room as well. So you can compare notes, you can schedule QSOs, very important for meteor scatter context particularly. The VHF contest for CQ is quite a bit different. One, there's only 2 bands. There's also, you can do single band entry. That's I have a buddy here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, WA5 Delta Mike. He loves 6 meters. He's got a kilowatt and 5 element beam, and he gets on 6 and runs and guns and has a blast during this contest, and he can enter just a single band. There's an all band QRP category, again 10 watts, well maybe not. Hilltopper is kind of interesting, QRP in 6 hours only. Then there's a Rover, only 1 entry for Rover, and a multi-op. There's no self-spotting. You can set up meteor scatter and EME contacts by frequency and sequence. Rovers can use APRS, but nothing else. And the scoring is about the same. So that's the big difference there. Simple stations, small antennas, you can see here, this is part of my my history here at home, a push-up mast in my side yard with cheap Yagis on the top there with wooden booms and wire elements, a 3-element LFA for 6. I use a stress Moxon. I really like that antenna. It's perfect on my Rover as well. And there's a picture of me, my proudly
Jim, I lost your audio here. Could everybody else hear him?
Yeah, I've got him.
Yes.
I couldn't hear him.
That's fine here.
Okay, it may be my internet. Okay, I'll let you carry on there, Jimmy.
Okay. Yeah.
I can hear you now.
Okay. Good. Maybe the pipeline got restricted or something between.
Probably me.
Okay. Well, this is the overview that W5ZN provides on average stations, and it seems pretty good, but it also points out how fairly simple it is to get onto VHF contesting. A 6-meter rig at 100 watts and a 3-element Yagi at 30 feet. And many of you know from studying 6 meters, you don't need much higher on 6, even if you're running a big station. 2 meters greater than 50 watts and a Yagi at 50 feet is outstanding. 222, 432, more than 50 watts and a Yagi at 50 feet. And of course, higher you go, the more elements you're going to be able to put into that antenna with a similar boom length. And I'll show that on my Rover setup as well. And this is helpful as well, preamps. They're helpful at 6 and 2, but they're really essential on the higher bands. Around here, 6 meters, 2 meters, the noise levels are so high, a preamp doesn't help me. I'm going to get what I get. And propagation, I don't have the esoteric ones, I guess, Aurora or TEP on here, but these are the things that typically open up in a contest. Sporadic E, we pray for those openings, and then it's a blast. It becomes like HF contesting, where you're running the stations, and that's a lot of fun. Tropospheric ducting, particularly on Sunday mornings during the contest. Meteor scatter, morning is good for that as well, but it can extend your range all times during the contest. And moon bounce, I don't do that from the Rover, but I know the big stations, Marshall here, K5QE, does some moon bounce whenever the moon's visible. So it's definitely good for contest. And of course there's some EME contests that I'm not addressing here. Contest strategy, with any contesting, it's about picking the category that fits your station. And I try to say this all the time. My purpose is to have fun. Sometimes during a contest, I'm not having fun because I'm dealing with some challenge or other. But the original purpose was to have fun. The second is to generate a reasonable score and then compare that from one contest to the next and justify to yourself, if not to your wife, why you're buying that next piece of equipment or that bigger antenna or whatever it might be. Another strategy is more bands and more modes. I'll address this a couple of times, but the technique is to move stations to the higher bands where you have more points, and more modes can help you find more stations. I'm trying to remember the guy's call sign, a guy out of Oklahoma that I rove with occasionally. He works with the local clubs, and when he goes through a town, he fires up on FM and tries to work all the guys there that'll just be kind enough to get online and give him a cue. Pretty amazing. So any mode, any band. WSJTX is now the must-have mode, and it's disappointing for a lot of people that that's the case. I was slammed with this realization in the January contest. I typically go to Echo Mike 11. I set up and point my antennas toward Austin and San Antonio. And when at 1 o'clock here, when the contest starts, I fire up on 2 meters single sideband, and I work a number of stations and I move them up the bands. In January, there was nobody on single sideband 2 meters. At the start of the contest, when the activity is at its very highest level, there were plenty of people on FT8. There you go. Another big contest strategy applies to most anything is butt in chair. You got to be in front of your station. If you're not working QSOs and multipliers, you're not adding to your scores. Is open, you won't find people on 2 meters and all the other bands. Everybody will be there on 6 meters, and you need to be working those stations. Move the stations to other bands for points. Like I just talked about, that's how it works. I think I've got some messages on WSJT that say 432, 144, et cetera, trying to get them to go to a different band, even though we're not talking to one another except digitally. Mention too that pointing your antenna is critical. You can see here's my setup. And that's phase 2 of my VHF Rover operations. Phase 1 was a painter pole with 2 antennas. This is a fiberglass push-up mast with 3 antennas and a stand-up station there out of the tailgate. But that's an Armstrong rotator that I moved that with. And critical part working any station was locate them on 2 meters, zero in, so the 432 which is much narrower beam width, had a better chance of hitting them and making that contact. And I usually found that to work just fine because there was also more gain on that 432 antenna. And again, another operating practice, Sunday morning, tropo, meteor scatter, that's, you gotta be there as well. Here's the current version. This is phase 3 of K5ND Rover. And you can see it's an Equinox I built, well, back on this picture, that contest, I activated 7 grids. For every grid, I tore down that antenna, packed it in my car, strapped it to the top of the car. And then when I got to the next grid, I had to set it all up again. By the 7th grid, I was completely exhausted and said, there's gotta be a better way. And so this was the better way. I don't operate while I'm in motion. That is a handicap. I don't do distracted driving. I have enough trouble doing driving, let alone without distractions. So I don't operate when I'm driving, but that is a winning strategy, and you ought to have 2 operators working in some omnidirectional antennas to help out with that driving down the road. But I get to a grid, I map those grids out beforehand. I go out and I find them and check them out for noise and position and all of that sort of stuff. But I've got a rotor on the top of a wooden deck that I built that's strapped onto the roof rack, a thrust bearing from DX Engineering, and a tower shelf with some masts to hold that up. And then I have Directive Systems Rover Yagis on 2 432 and 222, and then the 6-meter Moxon at the top. And then you can see here on the right corner, that's my operating position from the back of the car. I stop the car, leave the engine running to keep the batteries going, and get in the back seat, and I play radio right there. And for that particular contest, this was January, I was using a 7300 and a 9700, and it worked pretty good. And I had some RFI issues, but it did all right. And then in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the back of the car, power cables coming in from the battery up front, and power distribution to a 6-meter amp, 222 transverter. You can see a preamp down on the floor. That's for 432. And it worked pretty good. I'll be running similar station for the June contest. I'm hoping to be out in June. Okay, and here's some more references for you for more study, and we'll be taking questions as well. But Contest University is tomorrow. It's free, and there's some interesting topics there. I've got one that looks interesting to me, is everything you need to know about USB and serial interfaces. Another one, digital contesting hints and kinks. W0YK, Ed Munns is complete guru on RIDI and FT8 and FT4. So I look forward to that one. Optimizing your station for contest operations. Always get some good ideas from that. That's Doug Grant, K1DG. Grounding and bonding from Ward Silver and N0AX. And then Rob Sherwood's briefing on receivers and stuff is always an excellent thing to go to see. But there's actually some more there as well. Recommend, they have all their files, they have all their videos from previous contest universities. I've been to 3 of those classes. It was remedial training mostly, but Joel's presentations are in there for VHF contesting. Central States VHF Society, I'll mention, they organize the sprints. They also have an annual conference. This year's was to be held in La Crosse, Wisconsin. It's typically in July. Last year's was in Lincoln, Nebraska. And the first one I went to was in Austin, Texas, and I went to one that was in Wichita. And I'm pretty sure they had one in Denver not that long ago. They're excellent to go to. There's about 100 guys there, really good presentations and a lot of wonderful camaraderie. The VHF Super Conference, they've had 2 of those now. It's held every 2 years. The next is April 2021, and that's on my list. I really want to go to that. And of course, there's email lists. VHF Contesting has a list, and not very active at the moment, but WSJT has an email list. There's also the ARRL contest update that I find helpful. Even though it's mostly HF, there's always hints that you can pick up on. And then further reading, the National Contest Journal, there's a column. There's a few articles there listed. I have another article coming up late this year on more detail on my Rover setup. In QST Magazine, The World Above 50 Megahertz. And there was a good introduction. Ward Silver wrote an introduction to VHF Plus roving for the May 2019 issue, and I contributed a little bit to that from my painter pole approach to roving. And then you can look at my blog as well. This photo here is me reassembling my Moxon. It hit a tree. It's 12 feet high there, and I always try to avoid those, but my buddies, you can see some other Rover ops there, found a confluence of 4 grid squares, directed me there, and the very low-hanging trees, dirt roads, enormous. They all hit the trees. Fortunately, that Moxon reassembles pretty well in the field. But that's one of the aspects of being a rover, dealing with challenges. So that's me. Watch for me in a contest. This is a photograph, Echo Mike 03 grid. This was phase 1 of my rover journey with the painter pole and two Yagis and a 910 that I was operating. But sunrise on a Sunday morning on a beautiful little ridge. Guess it's northwest of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And a good operating location. So
that was it. Oh, great.
That's me.
Thank you so much. And any questions? Any questions for Jim?
Are there 3 coax going up the tower, and what is the number on the coax?
There are 4. There's 4 antennas there, and I use LMR 400. It's there. I could go with probably a 15-foot length of cable. I'm actually using 30-foot lengths of cable simply because they started out being used on that push-up mast from the same Rover vehicle. But the very top of the mast is 12 feet. And it's going in the side window, so they're not very long, which is another good thing about Rovers. You don't have some of the issues you have with the bigger your home stations with hardline and all that jazz and 100-foot runs.
Hey, Jim, you mentioned the IC 9700. How did it perform? How does it perform in the contest?
I thought it performed well. I will say that I don't have it anymore. I write for ICOM, and they sent me 9700 for some of the articles, and then a week before the January contest, they sent me a 7300 and said, "Put these to work." I struggled a little bit with RFI with both of those rigs, the rigs that I have right here is a 9100 is my go-to. It's built like a tank, so I like that. I have found the things that I found with the 9700 is that the spectrum scope is very helpful, particularly during a contest where you're trying to find those stations. The other thing that I found very helpful is that they upgrade their firmware. So when that 97 first came out, it had some issues with frequency drift. It wasn't entirely set up for a 10 megahertz reference. GPS, locked reference, and they updated it with firmware, and they improved the frequency stability, and they improved that connection with a 10 megahertz reference. So yeah, I think it works great. It worked good here.
Yeah, I had heard that, especially on the 7300 during contests, it had a tendency to get front end overload, especially if the antennas are closer together. We have a group up here in Parker who goes up in the mountains. They won't this year, but in the past, and they had a 7300, and they found that with the antennas close together, they were getting a lot of front end overload, so they had to sort of spread it out.
Yeah, well, in my I don't doubt that. In my operation, I wasn't typically operating. I wanted to operate 2 radios. I wanted to even interleave 6 meter and 2 meter FT8. And that January contest, I just ran into too much RFI to allow me to do that. And it was bouncing out my USB connections and doing all kinds of weird things, which was massively disappointing. I've since have several buckets loads of ferrites hanging around here now. And I solved that RFI issue really before I sent the rigs back to ICOM, just by putting ferrites absolutely everywhere and several loops through the ferrites and all. But coming back to your original question, I wasn't typically operating more than one transmitter at a time. Now, that's an interesting difference, HF to VHF contesting. With HF, I believe, and you can only have one, for the category of single operator, only have one transmitter going at a time. In VHF, only one transmitter per band at a time. So you can go you can really do that at VHF. It's a little bit more open, but I didn't on my most recent rows.
When I lived in Atlanta, I lived outside of Atlanta, and my house was up on a ridge, and I got a small rotor. I put a 16 element KLM. I had 2 of them. I had one vertical, one horizontal. And I was able on 2 meters with the TS700A. Even back then, this was a number of years ago, I had a blast working 2 meter sideband. I worked all over the Southeast. I was working regularly from North Carolina over into Eastern Mississippi on 2 meter sideband. And all I had was a preamp. But I try to tell people that VHF and UHF, especially VHF sideband, is fun. And they just don't have a frame of reference. But I remember those days. I had a great time.
Well, and
Hello?
Yeah, for me, I like how Joel says it. It's magic bands. And of course, we always refer to 6 meters as the magic band. But still, I think you have to be a deep ham radio operator or something. When you're working, here, the first time I worked from here in Dallas into Florida on 2 meters, I was over the moon. That was so dang incredible. And I learned it happens on a pretty regular basis with a tropo that opens up between us. But man, that was so cool. Now, my wife, it's like, oh my God, whoopee. But 2 meters doing that. And I did the same on 432. Yeah, it's a blast. And that's what I enjoy about VHF at any time. It's really cool to make some of these contacts.
Any other questions, guys?
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the 7300 is not recommended for multi-station operation. W3 LPL, the East Coast Contest Station, they've banned the 7300.
Well, he buys his own. He doesn't have to ban them, I wouldn't think. But yeah,
no,
I would agree.
People bring radios in, but it just can't handle the front end overload from adjacent stations.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, do you use preamps at all on 6 meters when you're running in a Rover?
In my Rover, there is a preamp. I use a TE Systems brick amplifier, 170 watts. It has a built-in preamp. I haven't typically used that. I'm starting to use it now here at home, testing it out, and I don't think it makes a difference one way or another. And of course, in a Rover, you don't need to have it up on the mast, or you don't really want it. It's 10 feet away or whatever it is. But I always use the preamp on 432. It's absolutely essential there. It's on my list to get one for 222. I don't think I need one on 2 meters, but yeah, the other two bands I do.
Yeah. Hey, Marty, did you have a question? You got to push your button. Let me see.
Okay, thanks.
You're on mute.
You recommend a small, inexpensive rotor for my stressed Moxon. I really don't want to go all out on it, but right now I'm going in the backyard and turning it the Armstrong method. But boy, it's frustrating when the band, especially where we are, and the band's open east and west. a lot of moving out in the yard. So, but I don't want to put up anything too big. Is there some recommendation for that?
Yeah, I'll share with you. That's actually what I'm doing here at home now as well. That 25-foot fiberglass push-up mast, it's strapped to my pool fence. I've got a 3-element 6-meter Yagi on it, and I'm running downstairs. It was particularly challenging on the sprint nights when it's 2 meters and I'm either pointing at Austin or Wichita Falls or Dallas or wherever. But for a stress Moxon, I've used one, at least 10 years now, and I've reassembled it a few times as well after hitting trees. But I've used the Yaesu 450. And that's the same one I'm using on my Rover setup as well. But I know the TV rotors will work just fine with that stress Moxon. I wouldn't put a long mast on top of the rotor. I keep it pretty close to the rotor, but yeah, a TV rotor will work fine.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Okay.
Stressed Moxon from whom?
It's Par Electronics puts together the stress Moxon. They also have some Omni angles. Actually, these are cool too. This is their fourth. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's a 432 Omni angle. So it's it's a true omnidirectional antenna. And you can see on Par Electronics website, and this is the 2 meter Omni angle. And I've got a 6 meter and a 222 that I use as well. But the stress Moxon, I've worked a fair bit of DX with it. My longest QSO on 6 meters was New Zealand, 100 watts CW with a stress Moxon at, it was at 25 feet. It works. And frankly, it works great, I believe, for contesting and the 6 meter openings. It's got a pretty broad beam width. So you don't need to move it very much as long as they're in the same general direction. So I think it works great.
Yeah, mine, I figured about 60 degrees, as long as, in that area, it doesn't pay to go out and move it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, Dana, you're a big contester. You got any comments or observations?
No, I think that's Jim's covered off a lot of the things that I've experienced too. I think he made a good point, Jim. You made a good point about finding the optimum type of contest entry. You know, whether it's low power, high power, 3 bands, or roving, and that plays very well because you can really, if you want, push your limits with the equipment that you have by picking the right category. And it's really quite exciting sometimes, say if you're running low power, to see what you can work, as you mentioned. I mean, working New Zealand on 6 meters would be something really exciting. So I think it's a very good coverage, and I just wish we could get more people involved. That seems to be the sticking point. Trying to get the guys when they first come out of when they first get their licenses to try this stuff and get on and put the handheld away and try something else, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's always a challenge.
Dana, how many countries do you have on 6 now?
130. Wow.
Oh my.
Impressive.
Yeah, but it's all Paul's fault. You realize this. Paul bugged me to get on back in 1979. I said, oh, Paul, yeah, I don't know. Like, what am I going to work? You know, it's 6 meters, you know? And then I finally caved in and got on. And the first station I worked across the pond was EI2W, who was the only one that was licensed in Europe in 1979. And, but it's all been downhill from there.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, guys? While we have Jim on the line here.
Are the Sunspots ever going to return?
Yeah, I think they will. Hopefully, we'll still be here.
Yeah. It was 66 yesterday. It dropped.
What do you need Sunspots for when you got sporadic E, double hop E, and all that stuff, and TEP?
Well, you know, that's a good point. We've actually got some guys that have made DXCC purely on sporadic E, simply because for the last 12 years we really haven't had any real. We had 1 day of F2 in the last cycle, so you know, but it's actually quite amazing that you can actually do a DXCC on sporadic E. You don't need F2, but I mean F2 makes it a lot easier. But still.
I got my first Chilean station 3 weeks ago with the transequatorial propagation when they had that big opening, and CE2 was on there. I managed to work him on FT8, but I mean it was so many other countries I missed when I wasn't around. But there's a lot of opportunities there, and this is the first time I realized that TEP was so, you know, transequatorial propagation was so good.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
All right, if there's no more questions, any more questions for Jim? Well, appreciate so much, Jim, you taking the time out of your busy schedule there to come on and help us out a little bit here. And we recorded this, and we'll see if we can get it onto the website, or at least a link anyway. And I think you did a great job for us, Jim. And I'm going to be on the. I'm going to try to get onto the the contest university tomorrow, and see if I can learn something. Because there's so much stuff to learn about contesting that you got to really try to read as much as you can.
Very good. Thank you for the invite. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome, guys.
Thanks, Jim.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
thanks very much.
We can see you guys next week, hopefully.
Okay.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.